Proud. My name is Shannon Crosby and I'm a registered dietitian with CoxHealth Wellness, and today I'm going to talk to you about the latest in food trends and technology. And so this is part of our Healthy Living program, and you can earn points by attending today. This presentation was developed with me, along with me, with Natalie Truber, who's a dietetic intern with Cox College, and she did a lot of the initial research and brainstorming to come up with the topics that we're going to talk about. So the outline includes cultured meat. That's what we're going to start with. We're going to talk about insect protein, hemp seeds, 3D printed food, and then I'll also talk about genetically modified organisms and touch a little bit on organics as well. The first thing I'm going to talk about is cultured meat. Cultured meat is food that's grown in a laboratory, meat that's grown in a laboratory. It's just like conventional meat, but rather than butchering the whole animal, the meat is produced directly from the animal's cells. Under a microscope, cultured meat is indistinguishable from meat tissue that comes from a cow, a pig, or a chicken. And I have a really cool video, but unfortunately I'm not going to be able to show it to you. So if you want to see the video, send me an email and I can send you the link, or you can look at Mosa Meat. The video is from their website. And Mosa Meat is a company in the Netherlands that has really kind of pioneered this research and is working very hard on coming up with a product that can be put out into the marketplace. Cultured meat is produced by taking some cells from an animal, and this is done under anesthesia through a biopsy. The cells are then in a laboratory fed nutrients and growth factors and allowed to grow. The growth takes place in a bioreactor, which is similar to what we use in other food applications. And the cells are then placed in a gel where they are able to start to expand and contract and get larger. When thousands of muscle fibers are layered together, meat is formed and can be eaten. So Mosa Meat produced the first hamburger patty in 2013, and it cost $283,000 to produce that one hamburger patty. They say that their meat tastes exactly like the meat that comes from animals. It's molecularly the same thing. And there are a lot of pros and cons. Mosa Meat likes to focus on the pros, and one of the major pros for cultured meat is that it is environmentally friendly. It produces significantly fewer greenhouse gases than raising animals for meat. Livestock contribute 15% of greenhouse gas emissions. Cultured meat requires 99% less land, 90% less water. It takes a lot of resources to raise animals for food production. Not just the resources for the animals, the land that they grow on, but also all of the land and resources required to grow food for the animals to eat. And so there's a significant difference in environmental issues. It's also thought that cultured meat will help meet the demand, the quickly growing demand by the world for animal protein. Our population continues to grow as very populated countries like China increase their income that they're able to spend on food. Societies will go from eating more grain staple foods to demanding more animal protein. And our current production agriculture is not able to meet that demand. And so perhaps cultured meat is a way that can happen. There's a potential to make cultured meat healthier than conventional meat because those factors, nutritional factors, could potentially be adjusted to maybe make it have more omega-3 fat or less saturated fat. And then also improved animal welfare is a concern to some. Some of the cons are that it's expensive. Right now, a hamburger no longer takes $283,000 to produce, but it's about $10. And that's still more expensive than a hamburger that you would purchase at the grocery store. There also in the United States is a lack of regulation. The FDA, the USDA doesn't have any kind of a framework for inspection or safety of these types of products. So that would have to be produced. But probably the biggest issue for me personally is that it just kind of sounds gross, But interestingly, MOSA Meat has looked at this issue, and that seems to be more of a problem for more mature, older people. Younger people don't seem to have as big of an issue and are concerned maybe more about animal welfare or environmental factors and are more accepting of cultured meat. So maybe that's just an issue for me and not others. In addition to MOSA Meat, there are a couple of other companies that are working on this technology. Memphis Meat is a US-based company, and they're producing a meatball that is made from cultured meat. You can see that there on the slide. And then my favorite name, Finless Foods, isn't that cute, is a company out of San Francisco that's working on a cultured fish product. It's thought that MOSA Meat will probably have a product out by 2021. And because of the expense and the limited ability to mass produce their meat at this point, it'll probably be like a hamburger product that you'll see in high-end restaurants. All right, the next trend that I'm going to talk about is insect protein. So if cultured meat wasn't icky, maybe this will be icky. Insect protein is gaining popularity as a protein source in the United States, although eating insects or entomophagy has been a common practice for thousands of years in other cultures. Certain cultures in Asia, Africa, South and Central America have already been eating insects because they're abundant, they're widely available, and they happen to be really, really nutritious. We haven't adopted that in the United States because we think insects are disgusting. So this is new for us, I guess. Where we're seeing insect protein is in protein powders. So to add to things like a smoothie or a shake or add to recipes, this seems to be a little more acceptable than actually eating the insect. Although you can purchase products that have the actual insect, and I found these on Amazon. I wasn't able to find any insect products locally, even like at Mama Jean's, and I went to some specialty stores. So I haven't found anything locally, but these you can find online along with products like cricket flour, which is just the crickets all blended up into a powder that you could add to food. So why would anybody want to eat insects? That might be what you're thinking right now. Well, again, it's environmentally friendly. It takes a lot less energy and resources to grow insects on a farm for human consumption than other protein sources. Insects eat human waste and compost, and so they kind of help in that environmental aspect as well. There isn't a need to really produce food for them to eat. They are helpful with food security because they're so abundant. So they're just really, they reproduce very quickly, and there are thousands of species that are edible. Nutritionally, they're very high in protein. In fact, the protein content per weight is very similar to what you would find in animal proteins. So they're high in protein, they're also high in iron, and they also have quite a few B vitamins, thiamine and niacin namely. So they're very nutritious, they're low in calories, they're low in fat, and you can prepare them so many different ways. Some of the examples are listed there up on your slide. Washed, dried, roasted, ground into a flour, added to food. One of the ones that made me giggle were those chocolate-covered super worms. The word super is what puzzles me, because that doesn't make it more enticing, Chocolate-covered worms is bad enough, but super worms. Now, another option is to just catch your own insects, and you absolutely can do this. Grasshoppers, crickets, worms, these are all common insects that are eaten in other cultures. You put them in the freezer for 15 minutes and that will kill them. And then you would need to spend some time removing their legs and head or stinger if it's a bee, whatever you don't want to eat. And then you could roast that. It sounds so funny, but I'm telling you, people do this in other places in the world. All right, now for something maybe a little more palatable or a little more acceptable, hemp seeds. Hemp seeds are becoming popular as the next chia seed or flax seed. Some people call them the newest superfood. Not new, but maybe new to us, new to our diet. And as marijuana in various forms and applications is being legalized across the country, many people are confused about the similarities and differences between hemp and marijuana. Both hemp and marijuana come from the same plant. There's different strains of the annual Cannabis sativa L, and there are different varieties of that plant. One variety is used for industrial hemp, which might be used for food production or other materials, and this variety is very low in THC, and THC is the psychoactive compound that produces, the high in humans. Another variety of that plant is used for cultivation of marijuana that includes THC. So hemp seeds, if packaged and produced appropriately, are going to have just negligible amounts of THC. And somebody asked me at a previous presentation if you could test positive for THC by consuming hemp foods. And from the research that I did, the answer is no. Okay. Now, hemp seeds are used in the diet in lots of different forms. You can find them at Walmart and different markets around town, like the picture up there, which is the seed portion, and they're often called hemp hearts, which is the same thing. And they have kind of a nutty texture and flavor. You can add them again to smoothies or shakes. You can put them on your cereal. You can put them with granola, put them into muffins or baked goods. You can use them in a lot of different ways, like you would use flaxseed or chia seeds. They're very high in fiber, high in protein, lots of healthy fats, a good source of omega-3 fats, minerals, and lots of antioxidant properties. So they are very nutritious and good for you. And now really easy to find. So here are some suggestions for incorporating those into the diet. Some, like I mentioned, you can eat them raw or cooked. You can find hemp seed powder that you could use like an alternative protein powder as well. There also are products made with hemp oil that you can use for cooking. Hemp milk is another one, which is kind of like almond milk. All right, the next one that I'm going to talk about is 3D printed food. And I thought this was just really, really cool. 3D printed food is kind of futuristic, and maybe you haven't, or maybe you have seen a 3D printer before, but a 3D printer prints thin layers of plastic that build up and produce a three-dimensional object. So 3D printed food is the same concept, but instead of plastic, you're printing with food. And the food has to be in a pureed form so that it can go through this stainless steel tube that you see there in the picture. So you put the puree in there, you program the computer to print a shape, and then the printer will make layer after layer after layer of that pureed food product. There are several different companies that are producing 3D food printers. The initial development stages right now have models available to professional kitchens that are very, very expensive, around $5,000. And the thought is that there will have consumer products that are available for purchase that might start around $1,000 initially that you can use in your home kitchen. These home use machines will have that stainless steel cartridge that you can produce your own pureed food product to put in there. Like if you were going to make homemade pasta and you wanted it to be a certain shape, you could, take the flour and the water and whatever else ingredients, put it into the printer, program it to print a certain shape, and then it would print it. Now you would have to cook the pasta. The 3D printers do not cook the food for you. One of them that is actually out on the market, which is a very primitive 3D food printer, is the Pancake Bot. And you can buy this at Bed Bath & Beyond for $300. I would think you'd really need to like pancakes if you're going to spend $300 on a Pancake Bot. But this is the same concept. You make the pancake batter, and you do have to strain it because it cannot have any lumps. You put it into the little cartridge there on the machine, and it will print the shape that you program into it, and it's actually printing it right on a griddle. One of the biggest downsides with 3D printers so far is that they print very slowly. And so when I read the reviews for the Pancake Bot, they were not very favorable. By the time you get one printed, and then you turn the griddle on and flip it, it takes several minutes, and then you got to print your next pancake, and then your family's, irritated because they're There is a 3D printed restaurant based in London. It's called Food Inc. And in addition to their London location, they are doing a world tour with pop-up restaurants, like they're going to Vegas and LA and New York and setting up these temporary pop-up restaurants. And the Food Inc. restaurant concept is that everything is 3D printed. So not just the food that you eat, but also the chairs that you sit on and the utensils that you use to eat it. Isn't that neat? It costs about $325 for a 9-course meal, but it is kind of an event. They print the food right in front of you, and it's just a whole, event. So they hold their recipes and the courses dearly. They don't share that, but these were some of the pictures that I saw on their website. So you can see some desserts, but I don't really know what those other items are. Not sure. All right, the last thing I'm going to talk about is genetically engineered food. And genetically engineered food really isn't brand new. I mean, it's been around for 25 years. It was approved for use in the mid-90s. And so we've had this for quite a long time, but it's an emerging technology too. I mean, as we develop more applications for genetically engineered food. So I thought it was worth including and worth noting too, because a lot of people have questions about genetically engineered food. Is it safe for me to eat? If I want to stay away from it, how do I do that? And so on. So that's why I included it in today's presentation. Now we have been messing with plant strains and animal characteristics for a long, long time through traditional crossbreeding. If we want to get an apple that's especially red or especially sweet, farmers would, alter those by trial and error, crossing two plants to produce a hybrid offspring with the desired characteristics. But in the last 25 years, we've been able to genetically engineer characteristics. They take a gene from a DNA sequence of one organism and insert it into the DNA sequence of another organism to create an end product that has a desired characteristic. So they're much more precise because they're doing this at the genetic level instead of by crossbreeding. So today, these are the genetically modified food crops that are in widespread, not all of them are widespread production, but that have been approved for production. Tomatoes. There's a flavor saver tomato that's been around for quite a while. So the first generation of genetically modified crops that was introduced in the 90s were engineered to be resistant to a specific herbicide. An herbicide kills plants. An herbicide kills weeds. But an herbicide will also kill your crop if you spray it on the crop. So these genetically modified crops were resistant to the herbicide. So then when the farmer sprayed the herbicide on everything, the weeds died, but the crop survived. And those were called Roundup Ready. And today, 90% of all of our corn grown and 93% of our soybeans are all genetically modified to resist Roundup. One of the biggest downsides of this, it was thought that initially this would result in a lot less herbicide being used because one application or a few applications would take care of weeds while the crop grows. But now we're getting weeds that are resistant to Roundup. So farmers are having to go back by using different types of herbicides and dealing with weeds in different ways. Corn is genetically altered to include a toxin for caterpillars. So the caterpillar eats the corn and doesn't survive. However, that toxin isn't harmful to animals or humans. So a lot of our food is genetically modified. I mean, corn and soybeans are used in so many processed foods that to potentially avoid them is impossible. You would have to eat just no processed food and avoid corn and soybeans in your whole foods as well, because almost all of it's genetically modified. So we also have then the flavor saver tomato that was genetically modified to have a certain appearance and stay more shelf stable. The potato is genetically modified to resist bruising and brown coloration. Papaya and squash, specifically yellow and green squash, summer squash, are genetically modified to resist certain viruses that are common to those plants. The apple is called Arctic apple, and it is an apple produced to resist browning. And so it's commonly used in the apples that you see in a bag that are already sliced, and then they won't turn brown. And then finally, sugar beets have recently been approved for genetic modification, and they're also resisting Roundup as well. They make up about 50% of our added sugar consumption in the United States. There are a lot of controversies around genetically engineered crops. The biggest controversy is their effect on human health, and there have been no studies that indicate that these genetically modified foods are detrimental to human health as far as the genetic modification. Okay, so at this point, all the evidence that we have says that they are okay to eat, and that proponents of them argue that it's no different than crossbreeding the old-fashioned way. I forgot to mention one. I do want to back up, because this one is kind of where it gets a little sci-fi. There's a genetically engineered Atlantic salmon that has been approved by the FDA to be produced and sold in the United States. And this salmon has additional growth hormone that's produced in its body to make it grow faster than regular Atlantic salmon. It grows in about a third to a half of the time. It doesn't grow larger. The end product isn't any larger, but it just grows more quickly. And so that kind of leads us into some of the environmental controversies, which really, in my opinion, for what we know so far, these are the bigger issue for me with genetically engineered foods. There are lots of environmental issues. One is that we have unintentional crossbreeding. If the genetically engineered salmon get out of their pen at their salmon farm and get out into the ocean and breed with regular salmon, then that's going to impact the genetic profile of the salmon that are produced. And then we've got a whole bunch of salmon that are growing in a third of the time, and how does that impact the whole ecosystem and balance of the ocean? So these are the issues that you know, I find kind of frightening. The plants, they pollinate by birds and the wind, and pollination can impact crops that aren't genetically modified. You could have an organic farmer that has to keep his crops free of genetic modification near a farm using Roundup Ready soybeans, and it will cross-contaminate really and impact then the production of the organic farmer. So those are some issues. People are worried about allergens too. If you would use genetic material from an allergenic food and put that into another food that's not a common allergen, how do we inform people that there's a potential allergen there? So lots of issues like that. And right now, one of the biggest hot button issues with genetic engineered food is labeling. So the labeling controversy comes in from the agriculture sector that uses genetic modification. The industry does not want these foods to be labeled, and they're very adamant about that. And they say that there's no need for labeling because there's no evidence that these are unsafe. And if people see genetically modified on a label, they might choose to not purchase that, thinking that it's not safe to eat, and then that would negatively impact the industry. So that's their argument. And then other people who are concerned about genetically modified foods and maybe want to avoid them for any number of different reasons say we want to be able to make the choice. We want to be informed consumers and be able to make the choice. So that's where the controversy comes from. And up until just very recently, the government wasn't interested in labeling at all. And there was no requirement that these foods are labeled. However, in 2016, a law was passed that is going to require labeling, and established a standard definition for what genetically engineered food is. Now, the law has not been implemented as of yet because they're hashing out exactly what this is going to look like. And the three things that they really have focused on so far is, number one, they're renaming genetically engineered food, okay? Instead of using the commonly accepted and understood term genetically modified or genetic engineered, they've changed it to bioengineered. And this was really, the industry wanted this. So the term is going to be bioengineered. It means the same thing. And then they're debating what kind of label to put on the food. And one suggestion is that you have this little circle with the BE for bioengineered, and if there's any genetically modified food, that has to be on the package. The industry is pushing for number 3, the QR code. They would like to just put a QR code on the food, and then you have to get your phone out and scan it and look at, you know, the website to say this is a bioengineered food. What the ultimate ruling is going to be when they're done hashing this out, who knows? So, if you want to avoid genetically engineered foods, it's difficult to do. Really, the only thing that you could do is avoid those specific foods, or you could look for certified organic foods. And certified organic foods are required to be free of genetically engineered foods. Now, if you have a processed food that's certified organic, the definition for a processed food is that 70% of the ingredients are organic. So you could still have 30% of the ingredients coming from a genetically engineered food. So even if you buy 100% organic, you still will probably get some genetically engineered food. So I'm basically telling you it's impossible. It's just really virtually impossible. And so for me personally, like I said, I'm not as worried based on what we know nutritionally about genetically engineered food, but I am concerned environmentally, and so I try to buy local from local farmers that I know how they're producing the food. You know, we use a CSA and go to the farmers market as much as we can, and that's not possible necessarily all year round. I try to buy organic if it's available and affordable as much as I can. So honestly, it's one of those things that if you really got into it and were trying to 100% avoid it, I think it would probably drive you nuts. So we do our best, right?